Hello, it is Monday again, so welcome to Learn with Flo. It's actually the first Monday of a brand new month. So entering the month of March, we get to celebrate Women's History Month. So I thought I would really get in on this opportunity to discuss some of the most relevant topics in women's health and wellness, especially around hormone imbalances, different signs and symptoms that women are really coming to our clinic struggling with, and some of the different conversations that I get to have on a regular basis, so that hopefully these conversations get to spark some good discussion, great questions, and really start to open up a door to make these types of conversations more mainstream, so that we can really all be empowered to have a full owner's manual of our body. As women, I think that that is something that more and more women are becoming interested in, is not just passing off their health entirely or putting it into the hands of a OBGYN or their main doctor, but really trying to be a proactive participant and a knowledgeable participant in how their body works. So all about women's empowerment. And I think a lot of empowerment, honestly, starts with education. So I am going to be a plethora of information for you guys, and throughout the course of March, I'm going to choose different topics. Again, more of the popular conversations that I tend to have in clinic, because I think those are the most relevant topics for us, but obviously always open to ideas and discussions from my listeners out there of what is really relevant for you guys, whether it is struggles with things like polycystic ovarian syndrome or PCOS, which we'll talk about today, all the way to endometriosis, all the way to different life stages and hormonal transitions of perimenopause or menopause. Those are the types of things that I know that women out there all the time are looking for the right resources and answers to be able to turn to when maybe they don't feel like they get a full respect or all of the testing really run that they want to from just their traditional mainstream practitioners. So as we get into the world of women's health and women's hormones, it gets, like I said, a little bit more complex. It is not unpredictable, as most people try to make it seem like, ooh, a women's menstrual cycle, that's just crazy, that's unpredictable, we can't follow it. It's not unpredictable at all. It's actually very predictable when we're working in alignment with our female metabolism, right? So we won't necessarily go into all of the intricacies of the female menstrual cycle today. I've talked about that on different Learn with Lows and also different Instagram posts that I've made where we really dive into the ins and outs of a woman's menstrual cycle. But I do want to give at least a little bit of some background information so that we can all come to an understanding of what is this polycystic ovarian syndrome or PCOS, who is impacted, what are some of the signs and symptoms, just kind of all being on the same page, right? So when we think about a woman's menstrual cycle, right, we have just basic woman's anatomy. We have two ovaries and a uterus, right? The ovaries are being controlled by the brain. The brain is going to be command central, specifically a portion of the brain called the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is constantly sensing signals of stress or threat from the entire body system as a whole, right? So based off of how the hypothalamus feels about the internal and external environment, it tells the pituitary gland, hey, are we going to ovulate this month? Are we not going to ovulate this month? And then it tells the ovaries to do their thing or to hold off because the environment feels stressful or the environment feels threatening in some way, shape, or form, aka it is not a great environment or situation in which to bring offspring into the world. So that's kind of a really quick and dirty version of how the female menstrual cycle works on a monthly basis, at least from a brain to ovarian connection. And that's going to be very important as we talk about this concept of polycystic ovarian syndrome today, and really how we can look at it from a more call it like functional or holistic approach versus just looking at it as an ovarian problem. Even just my explanation of how successful ovulation and menstrual cycles work, you're like, oh, the brain is a big player in this. The brain is definitely involved, and you are absolutely correct. And the environment is huge. Internal environment, external environment. What is the state of energy availability as it pertains to fertility? That's going to be huge. So when we think about this kind of first area of interest in our Women's History Month, talking about something like polycystic ovarian syndrome, it is more and more increasingly common that we're seeing women with this PCOS type diagnosis. Now, we're going to talk about today, there's multiple different types of PCOS, or kind of phenotypes of PCOS, and how it presents itself. So it's not quite as cut and dry as we once thought it was from a diagnostic percentage. So that's where it's making it a little bit more difficult to even just get somebody to listen about your symptoms, or even put the correct diagnosable title around it. So when we think about this term polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is where we get the acronym PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome actually is a little bit of a misnomer that we're learning now. It's maybe not going to be the name that sticks with this condition long term, but it at least helps us see visually what is some of the signs and symptoms of this PCOS type picture. So of a PCOS type picture, we originally started naming it it originally was named PCOS because of the appearance of cysts on the ovary. Now, not saying that there's not such a thing as ovarian cysts. Absolutely there are. But in PCOS, some of the ovarian cysts are actually being mistaken for just an undeveloped follicle, right? So what gives the appearance of cysts, which makes us think like cancerous, right? Oh, these unexpected, unexplained growths on the ovaries. As we look closer, it's like those aren't unexplained growths. Those are absolutely follicles. Those are supposed to be there. They're just undeveloped. They're the eggs that were called up to bat, but they never made it to the plate. They're like almost fully matured, and then somewhere along the way, the brain's like, oh, no, don't release that. And the ovary's like, what are you talking about? Like, I was so close. I was right there. I had this egg ready. It's beautiful. It's waiting. But the brain's like, oh, no, nope, don't do that. So when that happens repetitively, month over month, of what we call anovulatory cycles or inconsistent ovulation cycles, we get the appearance of these ovaries that are studded with cysts, but they're really just undeveloped follicles that never truly were successfully ovulated. So then we have to ask the question, why? Right? Why does the brain trying to shut this off? Why is it like, ooh, this environment doesn't feel good to successfully ovulate? So that is one of the signs and hallmark symptoms of a PCOS scenario, can be the appearance of cysts on the ovaries, although that is not the only diagnostic criteria now. Also, they look at individuals that have signs and symptoms of things like excessive androgen production. So it could be weight gain issues, weight loss resistance. It could be appearance of like unwanted facial hair, or more what we call like male pattern facial hair in females. So they start to like thin the hair on their heads, but then grow hair unwanted on their body. So it's a concept called hirsutism. We also tend to see anovulatory or inconsistent menstrual cycles, irregular periods, and even fertility issues. So some women don't even get diagnosed with a PCOS until they're trying to conceive, and they end up having trouble conceiving. And then they find out they have PCOS, and then they immediately pretty much just get shuttled down the IVF type route, right? So when we think about this PCOS model, and we're starting to think about this differently and bigger, in a traditional or a conventional medicine model, our previous understanding of PCOS was, again, that it was an ovarian problem. So therefore, our treatment is focused on the ovaries, right? So that's where a lot of times I would say the conventional medicine understanding is, oh, you have PCOS, here, take a birth control pill. We're just going to shut off this brain to ovary connection, we're just going to go ahead and just take that offline. And then when you're ready to have kids, let us know and we'll get you into IVF. It's like, really? Is that my only options here, right? Of going straight from a birth control to an IVF scenario? Is there any conversation or opportunity to talk about alternative methods of really asking why? What am I looking at? Why are my ovaries unsuccessfully ovulating or inconsistently ovulating? What is the environment in which my brain is sensing stress or threat and taking that successful ovulation signal offline? What if we could look at the level of what the brain is seeing? It's like, well, the brain is obviously sensing stress or threat from somewhere. So maybe I want to look at things like my diet, what I'm eating, when I'm eating, how I'm eating. Am I getting enough of certain things? Because certainly protein deficiencies and fiber deficiencies and micronutrient deficiencies, or just straight up calorie deficiencies, that's a stress. That is a threat. That will absolutely cause inconsistent and anovulatory cycles, is just nutritional stress, right? Also, things around the nutritional stress is blood sugar balance. Am I not getting enough of certain things in my diet? So then I'm over consuming some of the wrong things in my diet, right? So it's like not eating enough protein makes me crave more carbs, right? And craving more carbs then throws my blood sugars for a loop. And so now this pattern of more blood sugar imbalances, whether it's highs or lows, giving that insulin and cortisol blood sugar roller coaster, then is enough of a stress message that the brain is like, oh, nope, we're not ovulating this month. Like there is not enough energy efficiency out there, probably not a great time to be conceiving or procreating because there's not enough energy even for her, right? So it's like we need to start putting ourselves into the lens of the brain. What is the brain seeing? Nutritional stressors, environmental stressors like over-exercising, under-fueling, unmanaged emotional stress, also things, like I said, hydration, relationship with caffeine, alcohol, sleep, all of those types of things are like we need to be looking at and really having a bigger conversation around. There are multiple different etiologies or types of PCOS. So really the two major types of PCOS that I tend to see in clinic is an insulin-resistant PCOS picture and or an adrenal cortisol-driven PCOS picture. So both of them fall under the PCOS umbrella, but they have very different treatments. They have very different ways that we go about bringing kind of a full circle approach to their overall reversal of the symptoms. So in an insulin-resistant PCOS picture, it is like it sounds. We have an insulin resistance at the level of other bodily tissues where the body senses, hey, I'm not getting enough energy into the cells right now. It senses that there is a lack of energy or a starvation, even though there's plenty of energy coming in. So the insulin-resistant PCOS usually presents as blood sugar imbalances like elevated fasting glucose, elevated fasting triglycerides, high levels of fasting insulin, an elevated HbA1c, all of those types of things usually present in more of an insulin-resistant PCOS picture. And because of this, sounds kind of weird, I know, but because of this, the ovary starts to overproduce what are called androgens. Androgens are things like testosterone that are very growth promoting. And so because of this high level of insulin resistance, now the ovary goes haywire and starts producing high levels of testosterone, which then feedback loop to the brain and say, nope, no ovulation required here. So a PC or an insulin resistance PCOS type picture is a very different than an ovarian problem, right? It's like, this isn't an ovarian problem. We have excess androgens, we have blood sugar imbalances. Those are the stressors that we really need to go after in order to relieve this picture. versus more of an adrenal or a cortisol kind of driven PCOS picture doesn't necessarily have the high levels of fasting insulin corresponding to this, but more of the high levels of elevated cortisol that are with this. And because cortisol is produced in the adrenal glands also produce our precursor to testosterone, which is an androgen called DHEA. And because of this, we tend to see high levels of cortisol, high levels of DHEA, which can upregulate testosterone. And again, negative feedback loop to the brain. Nope, no ovulations happening here. So it's just, like I said, recognizing for these women things like irregular cycles, weight gain, hirsutism, hair loss, acne, fatigue, oily skin, headaches, weight loss resistance, like all of those are very, very real symptoms of a PCOS picture. But one, PCOS is not an ovarian problem, right? And what we're seeing as the appearance of cysts are actually unsuccessful anovulatory cycles. So it's not like foreign cysts. These are cysts that are there because the eggs are trying to ovulate, but they can't because the brain is telling them not to. We need to ask the question, why? Right? So once we understand that PCOS isn't necessarily an ovarian issue, we can treat it so much more effectively when we start to look at where we want to put all the pieces of the puzzle back together again. And especially from a foundational standpoint, not just shutting off this brain to ovary connection, we need to actually restore the brain to ovary connection. It's like it is already plenty offline because of the negative feedback loops that are telling the brain that it is not safe to ovulate. We don't need to shut that down even more. We need to encourage it. We need to foster it. We need to nourish it. How are we going to nourish really that brain to ovary connection? So one little disclaimer, asterisk, side tangent that I'll take for just a second, because it is very important to differentiate a PCOS picture from what we call a hypothalamic amenorrhea picture. Some of the symptoms can cross over, right? In that hypothalamic amenorrhea just means lack of menstruation. We're not seeing that consistent menstrual cycle, right? Sometimes hypothalamic amenorrhea, or HA, can be misdiagnosed or missed as a PCOS picture because they share that appearance of irregular or absent cycles, but hypothalamic amenorrhea is going to be a low hormone profile altogether. They have low insulin, low estrogen, low progesterone, low LH and FSH ratio. Like, these individuals are not ovulating normally because of an under eating pattern. Like, most of the time, a hypothalamic amenorrhea is more irregular cycles, or they lost their period somewhere along the way because of a chronic energy deficit, either an intentional energy deficit or an unintentional energy deficit through high levels of activity, like competitive sports athletes that don't know how to fuel themselves properly for their sport and to maintain their menstrual cycle. So one of the very important differentiating factors is this a hypothalamic amenorrhea picture where they lost their menstrual cycle due to disordered eating, or a gap in energy intake and energy expenditure? Or is this truly a PCOS type picture where we're getting anovulatory cycles because of blood sugar dysregulation or cortisol dysregulation, right? There's not necessarily like a disordered eating picture or a purposeful restriction of this picture. So that's my little tangent side, is like, make sure that we check it off that this isn't a hypothalamic amenorrhea picture just going missed or undiagnosed, because that is, again, a very different strategy than tackling a PCOS picture. So we have to know the etiology, which is why it's so important to listen to these women and to also do comprehensive lab testing. Like, we have to be able to understand that a PCOS picture that is more of an insulin resistance pattern, I'm going to coach that person nutritionally and exercise-wise and supplementally way different than I'm going to coach someone with hypothalamic amenorrhea, and way different than I'm going to coach somebody with an adrenal PCOS picture. So it's not just PCOS is PCOS. It has to be a greater understanding of what is my specific picture, and therefore you walk away with the correct treatment strategy and the correct approach. So when I think about like an insulin resistant PCOS, we have some insulin resistance happening. We have some blood sugar imbalances. So of course we have to address diet. We have to get these people eating in a blood sugar balancing way, prioritizing things like protein, lowering their glycemic regulation of carbohydrate intake. And a lot of times these individuals do really, really well working on blood sugar balance, working on a good relationship with exercise and movement, specifically even just increasing things like steps, lowering stress, improving their sleep and circadian rhythm can be immensely helpful for lowering their overall insulin resistance. Usually I also utilize some different supplemental stuff, whether it's an inositol or a berberine. Those types of blood sugar balancing supplements can be really, really helpful for a PCOS picture as well too. Versus an adrenal mediated or a cortisol mediated PCOS picture, that individual is going to have different exercise recommendations, different nutritional recommendations, right? It's like these individuals will actually probably do better with more carbohydrates, more purposeful carbohydrates, because their body is probably in a stress response because it's noticing a lack of, right? So we need to match their carbohydrate intake to their exercise intensity. We may need to back down their exercise intensity, but improve things like muscle building or resistance training. They also need cortisol lowering. So these are the individuals where I'm really, really big on things like light exposure. Are we getting light first thing in the morning? Are we blocking blue light at night? Are we maximizing our body's circadian rhythm around cortisol production? These individuals with that adrenal PCOS picture also usually do very well with mineral repletion, hydration, like working on things like sodium and potassium, magnesium, replacing things like electrolytes and minerals, and salt is huge. We can also use things like vitamin C supplementation or vitamin C rich foods, and these individuals may even do well with some of your medicinal mushrooms, some of the adaptogens of the world, whether it's ashwagandha and reishi, cordyceps, maca, and those types of supplement strategies as well. So hopefully that just kind of, again, gives you a little bit of a inside behind the scenes look at a clinical picture of this diagnosis of PCOS. It is becoming way more popularized, and that's just because we're discovering more and more that there's different etiologies behind it. So even if one female has PCOS, another female could also have PCOS, but they have two totally different types and expressions of it. And so we want to make sure that we're truly coming to the table with a customized treatment approach, both from nutrition, exercise, supplementation, things like stimulant exposure. What is their relationship going to be with alcohol and caffeine and light and sleep and all of that fun stuff. So hopefully, like I said, this was helpful for you to understand this PCOS picture a little bit more, especially if you yourself struggle with a PCOS diagnosis and you maybe after this don't really know what type of PCOS you have, but you've been told you have PCOS in the past, and you're looking for a bigger picture conversation than just, like I said, just a birth control to control my anovulatory cycles, or just a spironolactone to control my acne, which is really just an androgen blocker, or just an IVF treatment strategy when I want to have children. But it's like, let's come to the table and zoom out and see, what does the brain see? And the brain is obviously seeing something that isn't making a great connection with the ovaries. And there's a very real response there that we want to be able to listen to and adapt to accordingly. So again, if these types of topics are relevant for you, I'd love to hear from you of what's helpful for you as you're maneuvering this world of health and hormones on your own. And we're going to be using March as our Women's History Month to tackle more relevant female-centric hormonal imbalances, so that you guys can hear more of the alternative and functional side of things of how do we use nutritional interventions and exercise and lifestyle strategies as our prescriptions for for these types of conditions as well too. So stay tuned for more next Monday, and hit me up with any ideas or topics that you would like to learn more about, and I would be happy to cover them.